Well, welcome to the Middlesex Moments radio show. I'm Dr. Anna Wasesha, president of Middlesex Community College, located right here in Middletown, Connecticut. And today my guest is making a return visit, Dr. Chris Gargamelli, who is a veterinarian and the program coordinator for our Vet Tech program. And he was on not too long ago, and we were just talking about the program in general, but I thought it would be great if he would come back and we could ask him some veterinarian type questions. So I've given him a little preview, so he's ready to go on some of these things. And the first thing I wanted to talk about is preventive health care. So you want your pets to be healthy and to live as long as possible, and safe too. But this is spring, so this is when I think about ticks and heartworms and the rabies shot, just to be sure. So tell me about what people should actually think to do to be responsible pet owners.
That's a great question. So preventative care has really evolved since even I've graduated in 2004. So as veterinary medicine evolved, people originally thought preventative care equaled vaccination. So you go to your vet, you got your vaccines, and that was the primary purpose of the visit. And really, we've learned so much more and try to mirror human health care in that preventative care means wellness across the board. That we're looking at preventative for parasites, we're looking at dental disease issues, we're looking still at the vaccinations, but we're looking at weight, joint issues. So really, we try to look at everything holistically across the board. So vaccines have really changed and come a long way in that many of the core vaccines are now every 3 years. As vaccine technology has changed, whereas a rabies vaccine, a distemper vaccine used to be once a year, every year, we've gotten to the point where those vaccines are given every 3 years. So the stress now in veterinary medicine is that even though we've gone to a 3-year vaccine cycle, the annual visit is still very important. Where you may not get a vaccine at that visit, you still go and have the visit with your veterinarian where they do a complete physical exam. They make sure that they're on all the preventatives for heartworm disease, for fleas, for ticks. They're going to check the weight. They're going to look for dental disease issues. So really it's shifted from a go get your vaccine visit to a wellness overall visit.
I've always been curious about heartworms. When I was a child, we had an Afghan hound. She was a remarkable dog, but she got heartworm. That was before people were really aware of it. And I saw examples in jars of what hearts look like when they're literally filled with worms. They gave her something that killed those worms and could have killed her but didn't. So we were lucky. She was able to survive that. That comes from mosquitoes, right?
Yes, so mosquitoes cause problems across the board in humans and in veterinary medicine. So in humans, the big issue right now is the Zika virus. So the same mosquito that does that can carry heartworm disease in animals. So what happens is the larvae, the early stages, migrate to the heart after they're carried by the mosquito. And then as it carries to the heart, the adult worm grows within the heart and the large blood vessels around the heart. And what they do is they actually occlude or block off the blood vessels. So we can actually see heart disease develop because all the pressure builds up from this blockage. Just like you get a blockage from eating fatty foods and can have a heart attack in people, these worms can actually cause a blockage. So the way to treat it is to give a product that kills the worms. And it's called a miticide, and it's actually probably the same product that your dog received years ago because it's the one and only product, and it's been around for as long as I can remember. So it's 2 injections, and it's a small dose of a poison. But it's relatively safe to the dog. But what we worry about is all of a sudden you kill these worms, and now they detach because they're holding on for dear life when they're alive through all the blood flow. So these worms can travel to other parts of the body and cause blockages. So you can see occlusion in various blood vessels. You can see the body react to the worm because now you have a dead worm in the circulatory system. So it is a dangerous treatment. So now that we have such good preventatives, we always push the preventative first. And the preventative and there are various forms of preventative where, again, when I first started practicing, it was a once a month chewable tablet. The trade name HeartGuard is kind of the most popular one, but there's so many out there now. There's even an injection that lasts 6 months at a time for heartworm disease. So there are many, many different options. So that's why the preventative is so important, because the treatment, while effective, is dangerous.
So with the heartworm pill, one a month, is it a 12-month cycle, or is it just during the summer season when the mosquitoes are out?
So again, this is something that's even changed over the last 10, 12 years that I've been out of veterinary school. So we used to be to the point where we could say stop in the winter because we had cold winters. But with climate change, we can't convince ourselves with 100% certainty that in somebody's house somewhere a mosquito isn't trying to overwinter. So we recommend year-round preventative now.
Yeah, that makes sense. There's always one fly in my house in
Exactly.
February. Anything? Well, where did that come from? Well, we have to take a break. When we come back, I've got a bunch of other questions to ask you. We'll be right back. Well, welcome back to the Middlesex Moments Radio Show. I'm Anna Wasesha, and my guest today is Chris Gargamelli, Dr. Chris Gargamelli, who is a veterinarian and incredibly knowledgeable about animals. And I have some specific questions that folks here at Middlesex asked me to ask you. But before I do that, I am also filled with curiosity about animals and love animals. So I'm curious about why pets don't get colds or the flu. So sometimes, when you're sick, the dog comes next to you and lies with you while you're on the couch, feeling miserable and blowing your nose and coughing and sneezing, but they never catch a cold.
So that's a great question, and something that I actually cover on when I teach the students anatomy and physiology. So we do a whole chapter on the immune system, and it's a phenomenal structure, the way viruses and bacteria work and how they interact with the body. So what happens is, for the most part, viruses are incredibly species specific. So they don't jump species. So a virus that affects a person usually doesn't affect an animal. And the certain ones that do jump species become a huge public health issue. So rabies, that's why rabies is such a public health issue, because it's a virus that jumps species. A few years ago, when we talked about the avian influenza, the bird flu, that became a huge deal because it jumped species. So when a virus does jump species, it becomes a huge issue because most of them do not. So that's why when we have a viral cold or the influenza, those are all viruses, so they don't jump species. So we can give it to our loved ones in our household or our human companions, but our animal companions won't get it because viruses are incredibly species specific. Now, dogs and cats do have their own issues. So kennel cough, we see kennel cough in both dogs and cats, and we actually have a vaccine for the most common strain. So that's a virus that's their common cold. It's Bordetella bronchoseptica is the scientific name for it, but everybody commonly calls it kennel cough. So that's the one that the dogs and cats get, and we can't get that from them. And same thing, canine influenza has really become an issue over the last about 3 years or so. In that, we've just developed a kind of a very good vaccine for it. There's actually multiple strains. Just like there's multiple strains of the human flu, there's multiple strains of the dog flu. But again, it doesn't jump species because it is a virus.
So I should actually go back to vaccinations, So apart from rabies, and what other vaccinations? Distemper, you mentioned
Yes.
that. So is that also sort of like measles, mumps, and rubella for human beings? It's one of the basic vaccinations your animal should have?
Exactly. So we call it, both in dogs and cats, we call it the distemper vaccine. It's kind of the common slang for it. But it covers multiple components. So the standard distemper vaccine in dogs covers distemper, Parrot influenza, parvovirus, adenovirus. So we call it the distemper vaccine, but it actually covers 4 to 5 different viruses depending on what vaccine is being used. And in the cat distemper vaccine is the feline viral rhinotracheitis, calicivirus, and panleukopenia. So it covers multiple strains. So that quote-unquote distemper vaccine covers multiple viruses. So those are what we call core vaccines. So those are the ones that, regardless of their situation in life, we recommend that all dogs and cats get.
Is that an annual or every 3 years like rabies?
Both. So those are all 3 years now for most vaccines. Some manufacturers still make a 1-year vaccine, but those are 3 years. So our core vaccines are every 3 years. And if you had a dog that never left your yard or left your arms, so we're talking like, say a 10-pound Chihuahua or a little Shih Tzu, that would probably be where we would end with vaccines. But any dogs who spend any amount of time outside, with Connecticut being Connecticut, we worry about Lyme disease.
Oh.
So we have a great vaccine for Lyme disease. And then the other disease that we see in the wildlife here, so they're carriers, they don't get sick for it, is one called leptospirosis. So what actually happens, we see it in our raccoons, our possums, kind of our small wild foxes, our small wildlife in the area. And they actually pass it in their urine. So if a dog's out in the yard and there's some stagnant water, they can pick up this virus too. So it's actually, one of those things that we can vaccinate for and prevent. So that's one that any dogs that spend any amount of time outside, we do the Lyme disease and the leptospirosis. And then if a dog's never going to leave your yard or your site, we kind of end there. But if a dog goes to a boarding facility, say you're going to go on vacation and put your dog in a boarding facility, going to a boarding facility is like sending your child to daycare. There are lots of things floating around, and if they've never been exposed to it, they will get sick with a virus. So dogs that board, we do have a kennel cough vaccine and a canine influenza vaccine. So again, we have our core vaccines, and then depending on the animal's lifestyle, we have additional vaccines we can give.
So the Lyme disease comes from a tick, right?
Yes, it does.
Deer tick or any kind of tick?
The deer tick.
Which is tiny, hard to see, little speck.
Very, very small.
So when you put the tick medication between the shoulder blades of your animal, hoping that they can't lick it because so as far away from the mouth as possible, is that going to be effective against deer ticks, or do you also need to get this vaccination?
So you need both.
Okay.
So what happens, the medications that we have, so there's the spot-ons, what we call medications that go between the shoulder blades, and they've actually come out with some oral versions, and there's a couple of collars that work very well. So there's multiple different technologies to get to the same endpoint. And all of these medications actually repel fleas. They keep the fleas from getting on and biting. None of them technically repel ticks. The tick actually has to bite in order to take in the medication and die. So studies have found that it takes really about 24 hours of a tick being embedded before the Lyme disease is transmitted. And most of these products kill the tick before that 24 hours. But there is still a risk of transmission. So that's why that two-pronged approach of preventing the tick from biting long enough with the preventative and preventing with the Lyme disease vaccine ensures the best outcome.
Right. Because as you're saying this, I had an English Springer Spaniel who just passed away this year, but he had a beautiful coat, but there was no way, I tried to brush him on a relatively regular basis, but no way that I would be able to find every tick. He was a feast for the ticks when he would go into the woods.
Yeah, never. And ticks are the problem. Ticks, and again, with the preventative, once that tick bites, it's going to die. Because the other thing we worry about is a tick getting into your house and then biting the person.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So at least these products break that cycle. That tick is going to die once it bites into an animal with the preventative.
Right. Really important. Well, let me switch to some of these really amazing questions that came from staff here at the college. So the first one has to do with an African gray parrot. It turns out somebody here has one, but has never taken him to a vet. So one of the questions, there are a couple, I'll tell you all the questions. Should he be going to a vet? He's a male African gray parrot. Can the average vet, an ordinary vet that you would have in your community, see a bird, or should that be a vet who has special training in parrots? And if so, if you need a specialist, where would you find one? And before you even tell me the answer, I have to say, anybody who's never seen an African gray parrot, those birds are able to reproduce any sound they hear. They're just remarkable. At the Minnesota Zoo, which is a great place to visit, there was an African gray parrot who could do a phone dialing. He could do the water coming out of a drinking fountain. I'd never seen anything like it. So let's answer the questions about the vet, and then how in the world do they hear and reproduce those sounds? That's another question. So
sure. So it's actually a great question. So the first part of that is it's an incredibly specialized area of veterinary medicine. So my training going through, just veterinary school and being a general practice and an emergency veterinarian, I do not have the training to handle birds and reptiles. They are completely different. Even the red blood cells are different. Whereas humans and all mammals, we actually don't have a nucleus, the center part of the cell in our red blood cells. The birds and reptiles do. So they're just very, very, very different. So much so that the class I teach here on campus, anatomy and physiology, we're actually bringing in a visiting professor to teach that aspect to our students, just because I'm not qualified to do it. And who we're bringing in is Dr. Robert Giddings, and his specialty. So he has a board certification or a specialty in avian and exotic medicine. So that's where he spent his entire career just working on those animals. And it's amazing, I love sitting in on his lectures because I learned so much that I've never known. How to handle the birds and reptiles. So that's called husbandry, so the handling of them. Their different nutritional needs. And that's the thing that I learned more than anything else. The number one problem when he sees birds and reptiles is that their nutrition isn't right. So, compared to mammals, their diets, their nutritional needs are very, very different. So learning about that is something that, again, just knowledge that I never had before, and it's great listening to him lecture. So in terms of, seeking veterinary care, you have to seek somebody who's board certified in avian and exotic medicine. And there are a couple facilities in Connecticut that will do that. And just kind of tying back to the very first question that we talked about, preventative care is key. So again, the parrot may seem to be doing perfectly fine and may be perfectly fine, but going to see somebody who specializes in that, they may pick up on something slight that can be prevented early on and prevent a problem later on in life.
Mm-hmm. They live a long time, right?
They do. 50 plus years is very common for them.
Right. Well, I'm sorry to say that I'm going to have to take a break, but I am curious about how they have the capacity to hear and reproduce sound. Is that perhaps when we come back after this break, let's talk about that and then go into a bunch of other questions. Well, we're back to Middlesex Moments Radio Show, and Chris Gargamelli, the program coordinator for our veterinary technology program, and this is one of those shows dedicated to asking the expert, actually, about these things. So I am curious if you know anything about how those African parrots can hear and then reproduce sound. How is that possible?
So there's a lot that goes into that. So if you take a look at their structures, first of all, their ears are very hidden. So they do have two ears, just like us, but they're hidden behind the feathers. So you actually have to look very closely to find them. So that's where the sound comes in. And then how their brain processes it is a mimicry response. They just take it in and repeat it right back out. Yeah. And like I said, the actual anatomy behind it is beyond me, and that's why I bring in somebody else to lecture on it. Yeah. But the process is they take the sound in, their brain processes it, and it mimics right back out.
Yeah. It is. It's just remarkable. The variety of animals, the animal kingdom. So let's go into another question, because this half-hour program goes by like in the blink of an eye, so I don't want to miss these to ask you. So the next one is about rawhide chews for dogs, because there's so many options for chew toys. And the person who asked this is concerned that perhaps, first of all, that the rawhide be produced in the United States, because some of these come from other countries. And to make sure that, wondering whether or not you need to supervise your dog when they chew rawhide. So what's your take on that?
My career background is in emergency and critical care.
Oh, so you see.
So I see on the back end of what happens with rawhides. And the major concern with rawhides is an intestinal obstruction, that the dog chews a piece that is too big to get through the intestinal tract. Because surprisingly, the esophagus, which is the tube that goes between the mouth and the stomach, that can stretch really wide. So big things can get down into the stomach. But then getting out the back end is where we can see an obstruction. So if they swallow a piece that is too big, rawhide does not break down readily in the stomach, in the intestine. So what I recommend is there's lots of different options for treats, and some of the ones they make now are made out of digestible fiber, so that if they eat a piece that's too big, it'll hit the stomach and break down. So Greenies are a company that make harder treats that are made out of digestible fiber. And even the Nylabones, they have different lines of Nylabones, and some of those are made out of digestible fiber. So digestible fiber, so natural digestible fiber, is the way to go if you want to ensure that your pet's not going to get an obstruction.
The key here then is, just like with human food, read the labels.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So that being said, rawhides with supervision in a dog that has always throughout its entire life chewed it completely, that should be fine. You know, again, you can never guarantee it, but with my own dogs, I know I have heavy chewers that are going to break it down completely, so the rawhides tend to work fine with them. But I am cautious of looking where it is sourced from. You know, being made in the United States is probably much more consistent quality than in other places.
Sure. So now I have a nightmare scenario to share with you, because as you're talking about things going down the esophagus, the esophagus can accommodate some strange shaped objects, but then getting to the intestinal tract. So I had a cat I adored who ended up being the most expensive cat on the planet because it turned out that I used to sew, and the cat figured out that he could sit in front of the sewing machine and pull thread off the bobbin. And that was just so satisfying to him. And then the thread was threaded through his intestinal tract, and they had to do emergency surgery. I was horrified. So from that point on, I had to be careful about dental floss, also not digestible.
Right.
And I had a friend whose dog figured out that there was a rug by the back door with a thread hanging off of it that was essentially the weave through this entire mat. Also was just so satisfying to chew on that.
Very common.
Yeah. So how do you pet-proof your house? It's like child-proofing your house.
That is very difficult. So my cat likes balloon strings.
Oh, string.
They love string. And
Yeah.
those tend to be some of the more complicated surgeries we do. What we call those are linear foreign bodies, in that they form a line. So you have a long string, or you have dental floss or balloon string, whatever you have. The reason they cause a problem is they get stuck at one end. So they either get balled up in the stomach, or I've even seen them get stuck around the tongue. So they get stuck at one end. Then as the intestine are trying to pull them through.
Sure, peristalsis, right?
Right.
It's the natural process.
The natural process, it wants to go from the front end to the back end. That's how the GI tract works. So it's trying to push that string through, and what happens is the intestine bunches up like an accordion. So it becomes very pleated, because as it's trying to pull it through, it can't, because it gets stuck. So the intestine gets like an accordion. So we have to go in and unravel everything. So those are some of the more complicated surgeries we do. So pet-proofing the house is key. Because I'd love to say that animals are smart enough not to do something again, but they're not. You'd be surprised how many repeat offenders we see in our emergency hospital. The record is I've gone back into the same dog 5 times, 5 different times to take objects out.
Oh boy.
So dog proofing, cat proofing your house, it's very difficult because you never realize the crazy things they get into sometimes.
Sure, like the rug at the back door. Right.
But doing the best you can to prevent it will prevent a lot of problems.
Yeah, and there really isn't medical insurance for dogs, because when my cat was into this, we had to take him back twice. Yeah.
And now insurance is starting to get there.
Yeah.
It's less than 5% of the veterinary market, but they're starting to creep in there.
Yeah.
And I talk about with people who are interested in it, and you can get various levels of insurance, and having that cost-effective, catastrophic plan is not a bad idea.
I know, it really isn't. So I got one other question, and I think it'll probably bring us through to the end of the show, which is a question about whether or not it's okay to feed the ducks and waterfowl in the lakes and ponds. I mean, because that's what people do to entertain themselves in a way, is take the stale bread and go out and feed the ducks. So what's your view on that?
So with the stale bread, physiologically, it's not toxic to them. So you're not going to kill the duck or any of the other aquatic waterfowl by doing that. What it does do is take them out of their natural way of being. So, they're supposed to eat a wide variety of foods and, a nice variety of diet to get all of their nutritional needs. If they fill up on bread, they're not going to be meeting all of their nutritional needs. So it distracts from what they should be doing. The other thing it does is it takes them out of their natural state of stay away from people, because people, get in the way of their life. If they see too many people, they get too close to a road, they can get hit by a car. So it gets them too used to people, which they're wild animals, and as much as we adore them and like having them nearby, they're not meant to interact with us on a daily basis. So that's the other thing it does. It takes them away from their natural state of being. So is it physically going to be toxic to them? No. But it does take them away from their natural state of being. So my view on wildlife is, they're wonderful, and we encroach on their environment, so we should let them be as much as possible.
I can completely support that, and I hope that our listeners will think about it. So really the option is go to the pond or the lake and just enjoy them when you see them.
Oh, exactly.
And not try to interact with them.
Right, because they know how to take care of themselves. They're wild animals. Nature is wonderful like that.
It is wonderful. So, but now I got to branch to another question, which is, what about bird feeders? I mean, my husband is a bird feeder. I will say that. I mean, he's got always putting things out for the birds and loves to watch them. So, what is that messing with their natural environment?
Not to the same extent, because again, bird seed they're going to eat seed as part of their natural diet. So we're feeding them more of their natural diet. And this is something where we interact with nature in a more reasonable way, in that the bird has to come to it. We've encroached on the bird's environment for years and years and years. So having a bird feeder that they can come to, again, we're not directly interacting. We're not throwing the bird feed right at them or holding it out in our hand. They're going to the feeder. We're just observing them rather than tossing it, getting them closer and closer to us. So it's a more natural way to interact with them.
And it's possibly supporting them in a way, and I don't know what their food supply is like, or how it's diminished or contaminated with pesticides and that sort of thing, but there is a concern about songbirds, especially diminishing in numbers.
There is, and last summer was so dry for us that a lot of the seeds, a lot of their natural food that was normally there wasn't. So if we can support them in that way, I don't think it's a bad thing at all.
It certainly makes living in the cities, I think, more enjoyable when you do have signs that there's nature living around you, and you can hear the birds in the morning when the twilight breaks. And
definitely, that's one of the most beautiful things about being here on this campus, is that I'll be walking by and listening to the different birds. I was with one of the other faculty members. We just happened to be strolling between the buildings, and we stopped and just listened to the birds here, and it's amazing because we do have so much nature here on this campus.
Yeah, we do. Last year, or maybe the year before, the art farm group was building their set, and they just built the base of the stage, and they came back for a rehearsal, and there was a deer standing on the stage, which was a good omen, right, in a lot of ways.
It is. I mean, this is truly, if you look at the community college system, I think one of Middlesex's best assets is our campus.
I agree. So, before we finish the show, I want to just remind everybody that we have a veterinary technology program, and you are the coordinator of it. And we admit students every year, and if they want to find out more about the vet tech program, what should they do?
If they go to the college's website, www.mxcc.edu, go under admissions, and there's a selective admissions tab, and we're right there.
Oh, good. And so everybody else who's interested in other programs as well as vet tech should also go to that website and take a stroll around. We have the calendar on the front page, and there are so many events on this campus that are free and open to the public. We're showing a documentary shortly called Masters of Deceit about the kind of large-scale campaign in this country to try to convince people to doubt science. Science is at the core of veterinary technology.
It is.
And it's also about animals and also about the human-animal interaction and the global environment. And we were talking about climate change. So it's all interconnected. We're all part of the web of life. So be sure to look at the Middlesex website from time to time, maybe every day if you have the time, and make sure that you come over to the college to either be a student in a class or in a program or take part in the activities that we offer to the greater community. So this is Anna Wasesha, the president of Middlesex Community College, wishing you all a very good day.